what is their voice? Everybody has their own unique voice, um, their own different kind of unique way of speaking. So you want to kind of think that up for your for your character. What kind of what how does there is it deep? Is it light? Like how do they speak? What's their demeanor when they speak? And this is something that can sometimes be challenging when it comes to the editing process because when it comes to things like slang, of course, the grammar is going to go nuts. The editor, the editor is just going to go nuts on you. So that's where it gets a little bit challenging. Um, I remember in the beginning, I was always told anything that's in the quotations you shouldn't edit as far as like overly edit basically. So yeah, if there's things said wrong or for example, the one for me would be like she could care less. Um the editor wants to change it to she I'm sorry, speaking about like Grammarly and Pro Writing Aid. They want to change it to she could not care less or something like or I don't know, it's something like that or it's supposed to be she could not care less, but it wants to change it to she could care less. That's what it is. So that's a back and forth and I have to keep changing it and going back and check on it. Sometimes I miss it. It happens. But things like that, like slow slang words. Another issue you might come across is um, jargon. It doesn't really like jargon too much, so things like that, commonly said phrases and stuff like that. You just have to mentally ignore that as long as it's spelled correctly or spelt a way that you want because there's some slang where it's spelt differently. So and this is like specific to your readers. Your readers are going to know and understand what that means. So then you're going to want to maintain that because you want them to you're trying to make them feel more connected to this book and to the story and to the characters. So that's something you have to watch out for when it comes to the editing side of the dialogue. As far as for that, you do really want it to be authentic. You want it to sound natural. And again, that could be challenging when it comes to editing, but those are the things you're going to try to focus on. So anything in the quotations, you may not want to have it as over, you don't want it overly edited, um, or it will kind of change the tone of the book and how the characters speak. So in some cases, you may not want it too proper. In some other cases, you may want it very proper. It really depends on you. And then you also have to weigh this against making it so that anybody who reads the book can understand what's going on and grasp what the conversation is about. You don't want it so much slang that people don't, it's almost like reading a whole nother language for them. You don't want it like that. If you're trying to do something that's going to be universal, if you're trying to write a book where you want it to be read by a lot of different people from different backgrounds, then you got to think more, making it so that they would understand, even if they may not understand the all of the slang terminology, that there's something in there that some way that it can be explained to them in a way that doesn't sound stupid, and also that they could just understand what that means. So I'm trying to think of a good example. Um, there's certain like I'm not gonna say the word, but there's certain words, and it's in my last book, Forbidden. And in that book, um, one of the characters mentions that mentions a term that is normally used on the reservation, not really used off the res, and it refers to basically like it's like saying like, oh well, that's just a drunk Indian. So it's just a term that's used on the res between natives, and these people who are talking are mentioning that like this is how the world views them, and how that's insulting. So two things I did in that is I actually didn't even write out the full word because I treat it as the same way I would treat the N word. I didn't write out the whole word, and So people who don't know that won't understand. They may not understand, but then I explain later, like, oh, just another, drunk Indian. Like that's how they see him. And so they understood later on, okay, this is, I don't know what that word was because I don't really, I'm not trying to spread that word. So, but they understand what the terminology means. They understand, like, okay, this is something bad. This is something that's not really, this is something like how we would see the N word, and so I'm not trying to teach that word, but I want them to understand, like, to get the message, like, and it just makes the conversation more natural because that's how the conversation would have naturally went. So things like that, like, so they may never know what that word is. Some will, and but they understand the meaning. I hope that makes sense.